Ethan dedicated 5 years of his life to building a tech empire, only to be betrayed by his charismatic yet ruthless boss, Mark, who stole his ideas and discarded him without a second thought. Fueled by rage and a thirst for justice, Ethan plots his revenge, building a rival platform to crush Mark's company. As Ethan's star rises and Mark's empire crumbles, the tables turn in a spectacular fashion. But when success brings unexpected consequences, Ethan is forced to confront the darker side of his ambition and ask himself, how far is too far in the pursuit of revenge? With a tragic ending that questions the true cost of retribution, this story explores the fine line between justice and self-destruction. The day started like every other day. I was up before dawn, sipping on my usual black coffee as the sun barely began to peek over the horizon. My tiny apartment was cluttered with papers, sketches, and sticky notes plastered on every flat surface, each one an idea, a solution, or an improvement for Mark Tech. I'd built my life around this company. I believed in it. I believed in Mark. Mark had always been a larger-than-life figure to me. He was the founder and CEO of Mark Tech, a man who could sell sand in the desert and make you thank him for it. When I joined the company 5 years ago, it was just Mark and 3 other guys in a shared workspace, hustling to turn a dream into reality. I was fresh out of college, desperate to prove myself, and Mark made me feel like I was part of something extraordinary. He used to say things like, "Ethan, one day you'll look back at this time and realize you were building a legacy." I ate it up. I stayed late, worked weekends, and took on responsibilities that were way above my pay grade. I was the guy who fixed the unfixable bugs, who came up with the features that clients raved about, who kept the wheels turning even when everything else seemed to fall apart. And Mark made sure to remind me that my loyalty wouldn't go unrewarded. "Stick with me," he'd say during those late-night brainstorming sessions where we'd throw ideas at the whiteboard until we ran out of markers. "When this company makes it big, you're getting your piece of the pie. More than that, you'll be a partner." It sounded like a promise, one I clung to through every missed promotion, every delayed bonus, and every time Mark took credit for my ideas during investor meetings. He was the face of the company, the guy with the golden tongue, and I let him take the spotlight because I believed in the bigger picture. But looking back, there had been signs, little cracks in the foundation that I had ignored because I wanted so badly to believe in the dream. There was the time Mark cancelled our annual bonuses because cash flow was tight, only for me to find out later that he had bought a new Tesla the same month. Or the way he'd brush off my concerns about workloads with a pat on the back and a line like, "You're my guy, Ethan. I know you can handle it." I told myself that every startup had growing pains, that Mark was under immense pressure, and that my time would come. That Friday morning, I walked into the office like I always did, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, ready to tackle whatever problems the day threw at me. The office had grown over the years. What started as a cramped room in a co-working space was now a sleek downtown setup with glass walls, standing desks, and a coffee machine that cost more than my car. But even as the company grew, my role hadn't. I was still the guy who did the dirty work, the behind-the-scenes fixer who never got the spotlight. I had just finished solving a nasty bug in the platform, a critical issue that had kept me up until 3 a.m., when my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. HR meeting, 3 p.m. I frowned at the screen. It wasn't unusual for me to get pulled into meetings, but HR. That was new. I shrugged it off, figuring it was about onboarding the new hires or updating some policies. I went back to my desk, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. At 3 p.m. sharp, I walked into the HR conference room, still holding my coffee mug. Angela from HR was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by a senior manager I barely knew. Their faces were tight with that uncomfortable mix of sympathy and detachment that immediately set me on edge. Something was wrong. "Ethan," Angela began, her tone carefully rehearsed, "as part of a company-wide restructuring, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position effective immediately. We deeply appreciate the contributions you've made to Mark Tech and want to thank you for your hard work." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. I blinked, the words bouncing around in my skull without sinking in. "Eliminate my position?" I repeated, my voice cracking slightly. "There has to be some mistake. I'm the lead on half the projects we're working on right now. You can't just..." Angela cut me off with a tight smile, sliding a manila folder across the table. "We've prepared a severance package for you, and we'd be happy to provide a recommendation if needed." I stared at the folder like it was a snake about to bite me. A severance package? A recommendation? My pulse was pounding in my ears. This couldn't be happening. I wasn't just some expendable cog in the machine, I was the machine. Without me, the platform wouldn't function. "I need to talk to Mark," I said, pushing back my chair and standing up. Angela glanced at the manager, who gave a small shrug. She sighed and said, "Mark has been informed of the decision. He'll be in his office if you'd like to discuss it." I barely heard her. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my coffee mug and stormed out of the conference room. My footsteps echoed in the hallway as I made my way to Mark's office, anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. There was no way Mark had signed off on this. He knew how much I had done for the company, how vital I was. This had to be a mistake. When I burst into his office, Mark was sitting behind his massive oak desk, scrolling through emails on his laptop. He looked up, surprised, and then sighed, like he was already tired of dealing with me. "Ethan," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I take it you've spoken to HR." I closed the door behind me, trying to keep my voice steady. "What the hell is going on, Mark? They're saying my position has been eliminated. You can't seriously be okay with this." Mark rubbed his temples, like I was giving him a headache. "Look, Ethan, it's not personal. It's business. The company's moving in a different direction, and we need fresh ideas to stay competitive." "Fresh ideas?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Half the features we're launching next month were my ideas. I've worked nights, weekends, holidays, I've given everything to this company. You can't just..." Mark cut me off with a wave of his hand. His expression hardened, the mask of charm he usually wore slipping just enough for me to see the cold calculation underneath. "The decision's been made, Ethan. I appreciate everything you've done, but we've got to focus on the future." I stared at him, my heart pounding. For years, I had ignored the red flags, the broken promises, the way he always managed to spin my work into his success. I had told myself that he would make it right in the end, that my loyalty would pay off. But now, as I stood in his office, watching him dismiss me like yesterday's trash, I realized the truth. Mark had never cared about me. To him, I was just a tool, something to be used and discarded once it outlived its usefulness. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. "You'll regret this," I said quietly, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Mark smirked, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. "I doubt it." I walked out of the office in a daze, carrying a cardboard box filled with the remnants of 5 years of my life. Photos from company retreats, awards for innovation, notebooks full of ideas I'd never get credit for, it all felt meaningless now. My co-workers avoided my eyes as I made my way to the elevator, their whispers trailing behind me like ghosts. By the time I reached my car, the anger inside me had solidified into something sharper, something darker. Mark thought he had won. He thought he could steal my work, my future, and walk away without consequences. But he didn't realize one thing, I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The days after my firing were a blur of anger, humiliation, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I spent the first few nights lying awake in bed, replaying the moment Mark smirked at me, his words dripping with condescension. "It's not personal, Ethan. Just business." It echoed in my mind like a haunting mantra, and every time I thought about it, the rage in my chest burned hotter. I had no job, no savings, and no plan. For years, I had poured everything into Mark Tech, believing in the future Mark had promised me. I had neglected my personal life, sacrificed my health, and even bailed Mark out of tight spots with my own money. Now, I had nothing to show for it except a severance check that barely covered 2 months' rent and a cardboard box filled with memories I didn't want anymore. But beneath the anger, something else began to surface, something cold and calculating. Mark hadn't just fired me. He had stolen from me my ideas, my hard work, my future. And if he thought he could toss me aside and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The first step was figuring out where I stood. I spent hours poring over the notebooks and files I had taken home from Mark Tech, revisiting every project I had worked on, every idea I had developed. The more I reviewed, the more furious I became. Almost every major feature in Mark Tech's platform was my brainchild. I had written the code, designed the interface, even solved problems that Mark himself had deemed impossible. And yet, my name wasn't on a single patent, not a single piece of intellectual property. Mark had made sure of that. Still, I had something better than a patent, I had knowledge. I knew Mark Tech's platform better than anyone, including Mark. I knew its strengths, its weaknesses, and, most importantly, its vulnerabilities. And as I sat at my kitchen table, scribbling notes and sketching diagrams, an idea began to take shape. If Mark was going to steal my work and call it his own, then I was going to beat him at his own game. I wasn't just going to get even. I was going to destroy him. The first thing I did was reach out to some of Mark Tech's biggest clients. Over the years, I had built strong relationships with many of them, often serving as their point of contact when issues arose. I knew what they wanted, what frustrated them, and, most importantly, what Mark Tech had failed to deliver. One of those clients was a mid-sized logistics company called FleetNet. They had been one of Mark Tech's earliest customers and were responsible for a significant chunk of the company's revenue. I had worked closely with their CEO, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, who had always appreciated my honesty and problem-solving skills. I called Linda on a Tuesday afternoon, nervous but determined. After a few rings, she picked up, her voice brisk and businesslike. "Linda here." "Hi, Linda. It's Ethan," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "I'm not sure if you've heard, but I'm no longer with Mark Tech." There was a pause, and then she said, "I hadn't heard. What happened?" "Let's just say Mark decided to move in a different direction," I said, keeping my bitterness in check. "But that's not why I'm calling. I wanted to let you know that I'm working on something new, something I think you might be interested in." "Go on," Linda said, her tone cautious but curious. "I can't go into too much detail just yet," I said, leaning into the air of mystery, "but let's just say it's everything Mark Tech promised but never delivered. A platform that actually works the way you need it to, without the constant bugs and delays." Linda snorted. "You're telling me? We've had so many issues with Mark Tech's platform lately, my team's about ready to throw in the towel. What's your timeline?" "I'm putting a team together now," I said, mentally crossing my fingers. "We're moving fast, and I'd love to bring you on as one of our beta testers. You'd get early access, input into the design process, and a steep discount once we launch." Linda was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath. Finally, she said, "I'm listening. Keep me updated." That call gave me the spark I needed. If Linda was open to jumping ship, others would be too. Over the next few days, I made similar calls to other clients I had worked with, pitching them on the promise of something better, something built by someone who actually understood their needs. Most of them were hesitant at first, but the seed was planted. And as word spread, I began to get calls back. It turned out I wasn't the only one fed up with Mark's broken promises and half-baked solutions. But I couldn't do this alone. I needed a team. And I knew exactly where to start. I reached out to a few of my former coworkers, starting with the ones I knew were just as disillusioned with Mark as I had been. One of them was Sarah, a brilliant software engineer who had been my right-hand person on more projects than I could count. She was the kind of person who could write flawless code in her sleep and had a knack for solving problems no one else could even understand. When I called her, she didn't sound surprised to hear from me. "Ethan," she said, "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." "Don't be," I said. "Mark did me a favor, honestly. I'm finally free to do what I should have done a long time ago." "And what's that?" she asked, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "Start my own thing," I said simply. "Something better. Something we can be proud of." There was a pause, and then she said, "We." "I want you to join me, Sarah," I said. "I know how much you've hated working under Mark. This is our chance to do it right. No bureaucracy, no empty promises, just building something amazing." She laughed softly. You make a good pitch, Ethan. But what's the plan? I'm still working out the details, I admitted. But I've got clients interested, and I know exactly what we need to build. I just need the right people to make it happen. She hesitated for a moment, then said, all right. I'm in. But if this blows up in our faces, you owe me a year's supply of coffee. Deal, I said, grinning. With Sarah on board, things started to fall into place. We recruited another former coworker, Mike, who had been Mark Tekka's top UX designer. Like Sarah, he had grown tired of Mark's antics and jumped at the chance to join something new. The three of us began working out of my garage, using folding tables and old laptops to sketch out the blueprint for what would become our platform. We called it Streamline, a name that captured everything Mark Tech wasn't. Where Mark's platform was clunky and overcomplicated, Streamline would be sleek and intuitive. Where Mark's platform was riddled with bugs, Streamline would be rock solid. And unlike Mark, we would actually listen to our clients. It wasn't easy. We were working with limited resources, pulling 16-hour days, and eating way too much instant ramen. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. I wasn't just coding to meet someone else's deadline or fixing someone else's mistakes. I was building something that mattered, something that was mine. Meanwhile, Mark Tech was imploding. I kept tabs on the company through former coworkers and industry gossip, and the news wasn't good. The platform Mark had rushed to launch was a disaster, full of bugs, with key features that didn't work as advertised. Clients were furious, and the support team was drowning in complaints. Investors were starting to lose confidence, and Mark was scrambling to put out fires. I should have felt pity for him, but all I felt was satisfaction. Mark had underestimated me. He thought he could steal my work and push me out without consequences. But he was about to learn that some mistakes can't be undone. As Mark Tekka's reputation crumbled, we built Streamline piece by piece, fueled by a shared determination to succeed, and to prove Mark wrong. The garage became our second home. Sarah, Mike, and I worked side by side, living off coffee and adrenaline, chasing the dream of creating something better than anything Mark Tech had ever put out. The foundation of Streamline was simple, everything I knew Mark Tekka's clients wanted but had never gotten. Flexibility. Reliability. A clean, intuitive design. It was a platform tailored to their needs, born from years of conversations I'd had with frustrated clients. While Mark had focused on making flashy promises to investors, I had been the one in the trenches, solving real problems and listening to real feedback. Now, I was using all of that knowledge to outdo him at his own game. The first test of our work came in the form of Linda, the CEO of FleetNet. I reached out to her again after weeks of intense development. I hadn't been sure she'd take my call, after all, we were still just a fledgling operation working out of a garage, but when her name lit up my screen, I knew this was my moment. All right, Ethan, she said as soon as I picked up. You've got 5 minutes to convince me you're not wasting my time. Fair enough, I replied, smiling through the nerves. We've built a prototype of Streamline, and I want you to be the first to see it. It's not just better than Mark Tech, it's the tool your team has been asking for since day one. No bugs. No false promises. Just a reliable platform that works. There was a pause, and then Linda said, "You're confident." "Very," I replied. "If I wasn't, I wouldn't be calling you." She chuckled. "All right, send it over. If it's half as good as you're claiming, I'll consider it." The following week, I sat in on a video call as Linda's team tested the prototype. My stomach churned as I watched their screens, waiting for something to go wrong, but Sarah and Mike had outdone themselves. The platform worked seamlessly, and by the end of the demo, Linda was nodding with an approving smile. "This is solid," she said, her tone begrudgingly impressed. "You've managed to fix all the things that drove us crazy about Mark Tech. I'm not saying you've won me over yet, but this is a damn good start." That was all I needed to hear. A few weeks later, FleetNet officially signed on as our first client, and with their name behind us, we began to attract attention. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time, we had a real shot at taking down Mark. As Streamline gained traction, I kept a close eye on MarkTech. Rumors were swirling around the industry. Clients were defecting, investors were pulling out, and Mark was floundering. The platform he had rushed to launch was an unmitigated disaster, and his inability to deliver on promises had finally caught up with him. But I wasn't content to sit back and watch. Mark had stolen from me, and now I was going to return the favor, not by underhanded tactics, but by beating him fair and square. I was going to take everything he had worked for and leave him with nothing. My chance came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, Sarah burst into the garage holding her laptop, her face alight with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, practically shoving the screen into my face. "MarkTech is losing another major client, Concord Logistics." "Concord?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Weren't they MarkTech's biggest account?" "Yep," Sarah said with a grin. "And guess who's looking for alternatives?" She didn't need to spell it out. This was our opportunity. If we could land Concord, it would be the nail in MarkTech's coffin. But it wasn't going to be easy. Concord was a massive company with high expectations, and we were still just a scrappy startup working out of a garage. If we wanted to win them over, we needed more than a good pitch, we needed to deliver something exceptional. For the next few weeks, we worked around the clock, customizing Streamline to meet Concord's specific needs. Sarah overhauled the backend to handle their massive data loads, while Mike redesigned the interface to align with their branding. I spent hours perfecting our pitch, anticipating every question and objection they might have. Failure wasn't an option. This was our chance to prove that we were more than just an alternative to MarkTech, we were the future. The day of the pitch arrived, and for the first time in months, I wasn't sitting in my garage. Concord's headquarters was a gleaming glass tower downtown, and as I walked into the conference room, clutching my laptop like a lifeline, I felt the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. This was it. Everything we had worked for was riding on this. The room was filled with Concord's top executives, all of them staring at me with the kind of skepticism reserved for unproven upstarts like me. But as I began to walk them through the platform, explaining how Streamline could solve their problems and improve their operations, I saw their skepticism start to melt away. They asked tough questions, but I had the answers. They pointed out potential challenges, and I showed them solutions. By the end of the meeting, even the most stoic of them was nodding in approval. When it was over, the CEO, a stern man named Robert, stood up and extended his hand. "You've got a hell of a product here, Ethan," he said. "We'll be in touch." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was more than I had dared to hope for. A week later, Concord signed on as our second major client, and just like that, the tides began to turn. Word spread quickly, MarkTech's biggest clients were defecting, and Streamline was emerging as the superior choice. Our team grew as we brought on more engineers and designers, moving out of my garage and into a small office downtown. For the first time in months, I felt like I was winning. But victory came with a price. The more successful we became, the more I heard from old contacts at MarkTech, and what they told me was almost hard to believe. Mark was unraveling. His once slick confidence had turned into desperation as he tried, and failed, to salvage his crumbling empire. He was lashing out at employees, making erratic decisions, and burning every bridge he had left. The man who had fired me with a smirk was now a shell of himself, and while part of me felt vindicated, another part of me felt nothing. I thought I'd feel triumphant watching Mark fall, but instead, I felt empty. MarkTech was dying, and Streamline was thriving, but the victory didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. Maybe because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about beating Mark. It was about proving to myself that I was more than what he had tried to make me: expendable, replaceable, insignificant. But I wasn't done yet. Not until Mark saw exactly what he had lost. The day Streamline officially overtook MarkTech as the leading platform in the industry should have been the happiest day of my life. We had done it, against all odds, we had built something extraordinary. Concord and FleetNet were just the beginning. In less than a year, we'd signed dozens of new clients, grown to a team of 50 employees, and even started attracting investors. The office buzzed with excitement, the kind of energy that only comes from the thrill of success. But for me, it felt strangely hollow. I told myself it was just exhaustion. The grind had been relentless, late nights, early mornings, and constant pressure to prove we were better than Mark Tech. Every step forward felt like a battle, but now that we'd won, I couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. The celebration in the office felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. I sat at my desk, staring at my screen, trying to summon the pride and satisfaction I had expected to feel. It didn't come. The email from Linda at FleetNet came that afternoon. It was short and to the point. "Congrats on the milestone, Ethan. Thought you'd want to know, Mark Tech officially shut its doors today." I read the email twice, then a third time, letting the words sink in. Mark Tech was gone. The company I had helped build, the company that had betrayed me, was now just a memory. And with it, Mark himself. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe it was morbid curiosity or some twisted need for closure, but later that evening, I found myself driving to Mark Tech's old headquarters. The building was dark and lifeless, a hollow shell of what it had once been. I parked across the street and stared at the front doors, remembering the countless hours I had spent inside, the late nights, the camaraderie I had once shared with my team. It felt like a lifetime ago. For a moment, I thought about leaving. There was nothing here for me anymore. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure sitting on the steps of the building. Even from a distance, I knew who it was. Mark. He looked small. The man who had once been larger than life, who could command a room with a single smile, now sat hunched over, a bottle in his hand, his shoulders slumped. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and in a way, he had. I hesitated, unsure whether to approach him. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave him to his misery. But another part of me, the part that had once admired him, needed to see this through. I stepped out of my car and crossed the street, my footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Mark didn't look up as I approached. He was staring at the ground, his expression vacant. When I finally stopped in front of him, he glanced up, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize me. Then, a bitter smile crept across his face. "Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse. "Come to gloat?" I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I just wanted to see you." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Well, here I am. The great Mark Weston. The man who had it all and lost it in spectacular fashion." He raised the bottle in a mock toast. "Cheers to failure." I didn't say anything. What could I say? Mark had done this to himself. His arrogance, his greed, his refusal to give credit where it was due, it had all led to this moment. And yet, seeing him like this didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. If anything, it felt sad. "You know," Mark said, his voice thick with self-pity, "I always thought I was untouchable. I thought I could outsmart anyone, climb over anyone, and nothing would ever bring me down. But you proved me wrong." He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. "You wanted this, didn't you? You wanted to destroy me." I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words caught in my throat. Hadn't I? I had told myself I was building something better, that I was fighting for justice, but deep down, I knew the truth. I hadn't just wanted to succeed, I had wanted Mark to fail. And now that he had, it felt like I had destroyed a part of myself in the process. Mark shook his head, laughing bitterly. "The irony is, you're going to end up just like me. Success is a funny thing, Ethan. It eats you alive. You think you've won, but all you've done is build a bigger prison for yourself. One day, you'll look in the mirror and see me staring back at you." His words cut deeper than I cared to admit. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that I was different. But a part of me wondered if he was right. I had spent so much time chasing revenge, proving I was better than Mark, that I hadn't stopped to think about what it would cost me. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark looked at me, surprised. Then he shook his head and took another swig from the bottle. "Don't waste your pity on me, Ethan. I made my bed. Now I get to lie in it. I stood there for a moment longer, unsure what to do. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Sarah. Her voice was frantic, trembling. "Ethan, it's Mark. He's gone." "Gone?" I repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "They found him in his apartment. Overdose." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat down, my head spinning. Mark was dead. The man who had once been my mentor, my rival, my enemy, gone. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying our last conversation over and over in my mind. I had wanted him to pay for what he did to me, but I hadn't wanted this. I hadn't wanted him to spiral so far that there was no coming back. When I finally returned home that night, I sat in the dark, staring at my reflection in the window. Mark's words echoed in my mind, "You're going to end up just like me." For the first time, I wondered if he was right. Had I spent so much time chasing revenge that I had lost sight of who I was? Of who I wanted to be? As the city lights flickered outside, I realized that winning hadn't brought me the closure I thought it would. All it had brought was emptiness, and the haunting question of whether I had been fighting the wrong battle all along.